Hello everyone, hope you're having a beautiful day. Today, we're stepping into a warm and heartfelt Christmas chapter of Ly Tu Diep and Little Ly, a season where healing begins, laughter returns, and love quietly finds its way home. If you enjoyed gentle, emotional stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next part of their journey. After that awkward, heartfelt proposal with a ring made of grass, life didn't suddenly turn magical. There was no dramatic music swelling in the background, no instant happiness montage. Instead, everything slowed down in a quiet, almost unnoticeable way. The weight that had once pressed down on the house didn't disappear overnight, but it began to loosen slowly, gently. The kind of change you only realize later when you look back and think, oh, that's when things started to feel different. The silence, which used to feel sharp and uncomfortable, softened. It wasn't empty anymore. It became the kind of quiet that exists when people are simply sharing the same space, not talking, not trying to fix anything, just being there together. Christmas was getting closer. One morning, pale winter sunlight slipped through the thin curtains and stretched across the wooden floor. Dust floated lazily in the air, glowing in the light. Tu Diep moved around the living room with careful steps, tidying up, wiping surfaces, straightening small things that didn't really need fixing. It felt like she was afraid that if she moved too fast, the fragile happiness settling back into the house might break. Behind her, James was struggling with a large, battered cardboard box. The tape was peeling, one corner was dented, and it made a soft scraping sound as he dragged it across the floor. Tu Diep turned around and raised an eyebrow, amused. "You're sure that's a Christmas tree?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. James squinted at the faded label on the side of the box, turning it once, then twice. "I'm pretty sure," he said slowly. "At least that's what the seller told me." Tu Diep smiled but didn't say anything. She had learned that sometimes it was better to let James figure things out on his own. Nearby, sitting right on the floor, Little Ly was cross-legged, hugging a bag of decorations that looked almost as big as she was. As James shifted the box, colorful ornaments spilled out, red, gold, silver, rolling across the floor in every direction. Ly's eyes lit up instantly. "Can I hang this one?" she asked, holding up a shiny red ornament with both hands, like it was something precious. "Of course," Tu Diep said softly, "just be gentle." After a few minutes of struggling, unfolding branches and quiet arguments between James and the instructions, which he clearly wasn't winning, the tree finally stood in the corner of the room. It leaned slightly to the left, not enough to fall, but enough that anyone looking at it would notice. James stepped back, hands on his hips, inspecting it with pride. "It's not crooked," he said confidently. "It has character." Tu Diep pressed her lips together, holding back a smile. She didn't argue. She just watched him, and as she did, she felt a warmth spread through her chest, slow and unfamiliar, like something returning after being gone for a long time. For the first time in what felt like forever, the house didn't feel empty. It felt lived in. James grabbed a chair and climbed up, carefully holding the star in one hand as he stretched toward the top of the tree. He stood on his toes, reaching as far as he could, fingertips barely brushing the tip. "I think I've got it," he muttered. "You don't," Tu Diep said immediately, already walking closer. "Let me help." No, I..." Before he could finish his sentence, James shifted his weight just a little too much. The chair wobbled. He lost his balance for half a second. Tu Diep reached out without thinking and grabbed his arm. Everything froze. They were standing incredibly close now, close enough that James could hear her breathing, close enough that Tu Diep could feel his heartbeat through the sleeve of his shirt. "You're still clumsy," she said softly, not pulling away. James smiled, his voice dropping just a little. "But this time," he said, "I have someone to catch me." From below, Ly covered her mouth with both hands and giggled. James almost fell. The two adults laughed at the same time. It wasn't forced, it wasn't polite. It was light and natural, filling the room in a way that felt unfamiliar but welcome. That kind of laughter hadn't existed in the house for a long time. Later that afternoon, they decided to bake Christmas cookies together. It quickly turned into chaos. Flour covered the table, the chairs, and somehow even the floor. Ly had flour on her nose, her cheeks, and somehow tangled in her hair. James tried his best to shape the dough, pressing and cutting with serious concentration, but the results were questionable. Tu Diep picked one up and stared at it. "What is this supposed to be?" she asked, genuinely confused. James shrugged without looking embarrassed. "Imagination." Ly carefully picked up the misshapen cookie and examined it like a work of art. "I like this one," she said proudly. "It's a special star." James looked at her, his expression softening instantly. "Then it's perfect," he said. As the sky outside slowly darkened, they turned on the Christmas lights. Warm yellow bulbs wrapped around the tree, glowing softly. The light reflected off the ornaments, bouncing gently around the room. The air smelled like fresh cookies and something deeper, something harder to name. Belonging. They sat together on the couch, Ly tucked comfortably between them. She held a small gift wrapped in red paper on her lap, swinging her legs back and forth. James looked down at her and spoke gently. "Do you have a Christmas wish?" Ly thought for a moment, her brows furrowing in deep concentration. "I wish," she said slowly, "James and Mom Diep stay home." The room went quiet. Tu Diep tightened her grip on Ly's small hand without realizing it. James leaned down and gently pulled the child into his arms. "That's a wish I'll try very hard to keep." Tu Diep felt her eyes sting. She watched the two of them together and understood something simple but powerful. This Christmas didn't need snow. It didn't need expensive gifts. It didn't need perfection. It only needed them. Later that night, after Ly had fallen asleep on the couch with the cookie still clutched in her hand, James and Tu Diep stood quietly by the tree. The lights blinked softly, casting slow shadows across the walls. James reached into his pocket and pulled out the twisted ring made of grass. "I know it's ridiculous," he said, a little embarrassed, "but I kept it." Tu Diep smiled and touched it gently. "It's not ridiculous," she said. "It's honest." James took her hand. "I'll buy a real ring," he promised, "soon. One that lasts." She looked up at him, calm and certain. "As long as you stay," she said. "That's enough." Outside, the winter wind moved quietly through the night. Inside the small house, the Christmas lights continued to glow, steady and warm, like a promise. This time, they were choosing to stay together. The next morning arrived gently, without urgency. The sky outside was pale and quiet, wrapped in winter air that carried just enough cold to make staying inside feel like a small blessing. Tu Diep woke before everyone else, as she often did. For a moment she lay still, listening. No tension, no heaviness, just the soft rhythm of a house that was breathing calmly. She turned her head slightly and paused. James was still there. He lay on his side, one arm bent under the pillow, his breathing slow and even. For a split second, Tu Diep wondered if she was dreaming. For so long, waking up had meant remembering what she'd lost. Now, waking up meant remembering what she had chosen to keep. She smiled quietly and slipped out of bed. In the kitchen, Tu Diep moved carefully, making breakfast with small, familiar motions. The kettle clicked on. Bread warmed in the pan. She cracked eggs softly, the sound echoing gently in the stillness. Outside the window, thin branches swayed slightly in the wind. Behind her, a sleepy voice broke the silence. "You're up early." Tu Diep turned to see James standing in the doorway, hair messy, eyes half open. "Habit," she said softly. He walked over, leaned against the counter, and watched her for a moment. "I used to hate mornings," he admitted. "They always felt empty." She glanced at him. "And now? Now they feel like a beginning." Before she could respond, small footsteps padded across the floor. "Mom Diep?" Nee appeared in the doorway, still wrapped in her oversized pajamas, clutching a stuffed toy. "Is it Christmas yet?" she asked hopefully. James laughed softly. "Almost." Nee frowned. "Almost is too slow." They all laughed. After breakfast, they decided to go out together. The air outside was cold but clear, the kind that made cheeks pink and breaths visible. Tu Diep wrapped a scarf around Nee, tucking it carefully under her chin. James watched, hands shoved into his coat pockets, a faint smile on his face. They walked through the neighborhood slowly, not in a hurry to get anywhere. Small shops were already decorated, windows glowing with lights, wreaths hanging on doors. Christmas music drifted faintly from somewhere down the street. Nee stopped at every window, pointing excitedly. "Look, snowman! Look, that one's shiny. James, look at this." James followed her gaze every time, even when it was the same thing she'd pointed out moments earlier. At a small street stall, Nee tugged on James's sleeve. "Can we buy this one?" It was a tiny wooden ornament, hand-carved, simple and imperfect. James crouched down to her level. "Do you like it?" Nee nodded vigorously. "It looks warm." James didn't ask why. He paid and handed it to her. Back home, the afternoon passed quietly. Tu Diep wrapped a few small gifts at the table. James fixed a loose string of lights that refused to cooperate. Nee sat nearby, humming softly, playing with scraps of wrapping paper. At one point, James climbed onto the chair again to adjust the lights. "Be careful," Tu Diep said instinctively. He glanced down at her and smiled. "I will be." This time he didn't wobble. As evening settled in, they prepared dinner together. Nothing fancy. Simple dishes, familiar flavors. Steam filled the kitchen, fogging the windows. The smell of food wrapped around the house like another layer of warmth. They ate slowly, talking about small things, stories from Nee's day, a memory James shared from his childhood, a quiet joke that made Tu Diep laugh unexpectedly hard. After dinner, they gathered in the living room. The tree lights blinked softly. Outside, the night had fully settled in. Nee climbed onto James's lap, holding the small wooden ornament. "Can we put this on last?" she asked. "Why last?" James asked. "So it stays the longest." James's throat tightened slightly. "Okay," he said. "Last." When the ornament was finally placed on the tree, Nee clapped her hands. "Now it's really Christmas." Later, after Nee had fallen asleep in her bed, the house grew quiet again, but not lonely. Tu Diep stood by the window, watching the faint glow of streetlights outside. James joined her, standing close but not touching. "Are you scared?" he asked quietly. She thought for a moment. "A little." "Me too," he admitted. They stood there in silence, honest and unguarded. "I don't know what tomorrow looks like," James said. "I don't know if things will be easy." Tu Diep turned to him. "They don't have to be easy." He nodded. "They just have to be real." She reached out and took his hand. Across the room, the Christmas lights glowed steadily, reflecting softly in the glass. Not flashy, not perfect, just enough. That night, as winter wrapped itself around the small house, something settled into place. Not certainty, not answers, but choice. And this time, they were choosing each other, again and again and again. After James' heartfelt proposal with a simple grass ring, life slowly begins to soften for him and Tu Diep. As Christmas approaches, the heavy silence in the house is replaced by warmth, laughter, and small moments of togetherness. James, Tu Diep, and little Ly prepare for the holiday by decorating a slightly crooked Christmas tree, baking cookies, and sharing quiet joy. Through clumsy mistakes and gentle laughter, they rediscover the comfort of being a family. Ly's innocent wish for them to stay together reminds James and Tu Diep of what truly matters. That Christmas doesn't need perfection or luxury, only love, honesty, and presence. In the soft glow of Christmas lights, they choose to stay, heal, and build a future together.